So I'm just going to read the very short description of the panel to reset us and remind us why we're here. This is a roundtable discussion on location scouting, and the questions we're sort of looking at are, what makes a good LARP location? What are some considerations you need to take into account when looking at various locations? And this roundtable will discuss the pros and cons of various sites with variables such as genre, decor, insurance, lodging, food, laws and ordinances, etc. And I'm sure we'll spiral off from that into all manner of other topics relating to locations. So I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Cameron Betts. I'm the moderator. I have a little bit of experience location scouting for pervasive 360 games in the Boston area, and also doing hotel searches and management for conventions. And if you kind of like to introduce yourself and just give a one-line description of what your relationship with location scouting is.
Sure. I'm Kathy Amende, and I am with Peculiar Crossroads Productions, and we do a lot of small events yearly, but this past January we did our first blockbuster, and that involved a ton of location scouting to find the right place, and so that's why I'm here.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hart. I am the one half of the crew of the sinking ship, which is the name of our company, putting on Project Ascension in New York City, a cyberpunk 360-degree design with LARP with pervasive elements. That's a mouthful. I've been running LARPs on my own without any other organization for about 6 years right now. Before that, I ran for about 10 years with various organizations. I'm also active in the New York City community. I work with David Spira of Escape Room Artist, who actually I tried to get to come here this year, maybe he'll be here, who looks at other elements of finding space in large urban areas. And then I'm also the treasurer of a nonprofit theater in New York, an off-Broadway theater company, which has unique space concerns. So I kind of think that I have a spectrum range from, I do something in a diner for $250 to I'm working with a $2 million company who has a lease on 36th Street in Midtown Manhattan. So try and give you a range on that.
So I'd like to start with just a sort of broad question. When we're thinking about LARP locations, we're going to come up with essentially some sort of list of requirements or desires that you want out of a space in order to run. I think both of you you're about to do a blockbuster in New York. You finished one recently in New Orleans. I'd like to you to discuss a little bit about how you envision those requirements or desires, and what was the distinction between a requirement and a desire in those experiences? Like, what makes a good LARP location? How do we decide that?
I think that there are a couple of things that no matter what kind of LARP you're doing, for us at any rate, there is a must list. For us, whether we're running a small event or a big event, there has to be accessibility. We need to make sure that people can actually come and play the game, and this is things like making sure that you're in a place where the hallways are wide enough for wheelchairs or for mobility impaired people, that you're not working in a space where there are flickering lights or something that's going to set off somebody's triggers. So accessibility is kind of number one for us. If we are, all of our small events have also included overnights and food. So the second must for us is that it either needs to have some kind of space available for making food, or it has to have some kind of catering that's easy to get to. But that's not going to be a must for everyone. It just is for us. And then really the other thing is people have to be able to get to it, which means if you've got people coming in for a game, it needs to either be near an airport or near a major city, so that people aren't coming in and then also having to drive 3 hours to get to your space, because every step that you make it more difficult to get to your game is the more expensive it is and the less likely people are going to come. So those are kind of the big ones right off the bat. And whatever he's going to say, I'm probably going to agree with anyway. So
You get my number one thing.
okay.
And the only thing I look for in a site at this point, I used to look for anything in the site, and you guys know Shoshana, we talked to her, and I decided the only thing I look for in a site is accessibility. And when I look at it, the other thing I remember about accessibility is a spectrum, not a switch. So right now I'm doing, in terms of accessibility, for example, I'm doing a one shot in Sailor, Soldier, Airman, and Marine Club, who really need to rename their place. SMAC, as they like to call it, which is a military available place in New York City. It's an old brownstone on Lexington Avenue, and there's 2 steps there. And then when I decided, I'm like, all right, there's ways to get away, and they have a lift, but they don't have any way over those 2 steps. Everything, it is a building from before 1900. How do we make that accessible? And then the question is, well, what do we do? And the one thing I ask everybody when they buy a ticket is, what are the accessibility issues? Because I need to know when I have in my budget if I need to buy a ramp for those 2 steps. And that's a spectrum. How do I make it more accessible? How do I make it less accessible? Because if I'm in California, in Los Angeles, where I don't have a building that's more than 100 years old, I have radically different requirements than if I'm in Boston, downtown Boston, where buildings could be 300 years old. And there's different laws in New York and Massachusetts and all of that, and there's different things. And so when I look at accessibility, I look at it as I will never be as accessible to any individual, regardless of whatever needs they have, as their own home. So I have to say, how do I make this as much like their home as they can? And then my line is there anybody who I can tell they would not have, I could not allow to participate based on that? And that's where I personally draw the line. The other difference between us is I'm exclusively New York adjacent, so I don't worry about major airports or anything like that. So I guess if I had another thing that I looked at, I'm like, I'm going to stay in my hometown. I'm going to stay on my own turf. And that's an advantage that I have living, that's probably the only advantage I have living in New York, is that I'm right next to New York. And that is a draw, but then I have to deal with all the other stuff. So I don't go into Delaware. If anybody ever wants to, I don't go to Idaho. I can give you a town for $2,000 in Idaho. It is 6 hours away from any airport. Good luck getting people to that game, but it's $2,000. So it's $2,000 in February in Idaho. I'm like, let's do it. I will help. I am down with it. Let's talk. But that's the sort of things that you have to do. And the one thing that I would like to talk about this panel sliding is that I am always looking for space. It is a full-time, 24/7 job. I'm like, because that is the first question I ask. You say, what are my requirements in my space? I don't have any requirements in my space because I don't begin designing until I find a space that I want to design. And then I design, and I'm different than other people, and I design to that space.
Is that also your experience? Or
We do a little of both. We have, so one of the things that we've been doing for the last 10 years is every May we run what we call the Lake House Game, or Terror at the Lake. And it started as my husband's birthday present, is that we were going to do this one shot. And over the last 10 years, our invite list has grown to about 200 people. And whenever people hear about it, they want an invite, and so, you know, we put them on the invite list. But we don't charge anything more than, you know, the cost of the site and the food, and we parcel that out amongst everyone who's coming. But we have found that the only space that accommodates 50 people that is still like a lake house, someplace you can go and do your game, but then also have fun and play games and swim and stuff, is this one house in Georgia. And it's the only one that accommodates enough people. So one of the things we've been doing is building to that space. Saying, all right, we know that every year we're going to run a lake house event in this lake house, so we need to create a game where what you see is what you get. That there is a reason you're at this lake house. But when we ran Armistice Arcane, before we ran that, we knew what we were running. And so we had to find a space, and we knew we wanted to run it for 100 people. So we knew we had to find a space that could accommodate 100 people and was also appropriate for a game that was set in 1897. So the requirements there were much more stringent, and I was willing to basically look anywhere in the country as long as it was near enough to an airport that people could go there, because people were going to have to fly no matter where we put it. So I have kind of that experience with doing it both ways.
I mean, I definitely made the mistake when I was running my game of writing a game and then trying to find the locations for it. Universally, some of them were very easy, but the one that I think I had the hardest time was that we had written this whole plot about an orphanage that burned down 20 years prior, and then I had to go out and find an orphanage that had burned down 20 years before, or something that could stand in for that, and it was not an easy thing to do, and no one rents burned out orphanages.
However, there's a factory in Delaware, this is why I say always look at 24/7, there's a factory on the Wilmington River in Delaware that they rent out for this event, as long as you don't go in any buildings, that is a burnt down factory.
Yeah, I mean, you can eventually find these things, they do exist, but locating them and securing them and burying things there, those are all challenges. But I actually wanted to push back a little bit on the first question again. So back to the first question, we talked a little about requirements, and I hear you talk about requirements, and I say, well, in terms of your requirements, those requirements are fulfilled by any hotel, any modern hotel in this country. So I suggest, I want to go one layer deeper and say, okay, you have that base level of requirements. How do you, what's next? What's the next thing? If you walk into this hotel, how you're not just okay, it fulfills my requirements, why not here?
So one of the things I was thinking of when I was walking around this space is that it looks like a hotel, right? It looks like a contemporary modern hotel. You've got the contemporary walls that move. This is it could be anywhere from the 1970s up into the present day. So when we were doing Armistice, we needed something that had historical elements to it. So in particular, we were looking for a hotel that existed in 1897 or was maybe built within 10 years of 1897 and still tried to maintain the historical look of the time period it was built in. So we, one of the resources I used was there's a site online called historical hotels, or there's another site called Unique Venues, and there's a subcategory in Unique Venues, which is historical venues. And so we went through a lot of those. I mean, I really, really want to go out to the island where they filmed Somewhere in Time and run a LARP out there, but that would be absolutely ridiculously expensive and basically it would be too prohibitive for everybody. But there's a lot of these hotels that are there. You also know, like New Orleans, it's known for being this historical city. So it's a little easier if you pick the locations or the cities where you know that there is something historical. But we looked at places in New York, and we looked at places in Pennsylvania, and we looked at places, I think we looked at Savannah. So we looked at a lot of historical places to try to find that. So I think when you ask what are your requirements, it's really going to depend on, if you're doing game to site as opposed to site to game, then it's really going to depend on what the game is.
When I look for a location, I look for something, I do, right now, it used to be I was looking for stuff that inspired me. And now I'm looking for stuff that inspires me that I can sell. Because I think that location is one of the big draws if you're doing for profit. So I'll give two examples, a failure and a success. The failure I just had on Tuesday, in that I got all the way to the mayor's office with the city of New York to rent out the transit museum so I could do a LARP in a subway station. No. They said no to me on Tuesday. They said yes, no. The way I found it is I was walking, I'm like, I want to do something in a subway station, so I Google subway rental. And then I go down there and I have cards. If you want to do site location, the best tool that you can have is have cards with your name on it. Because until you hand somebody a card with your name on it, they're like, whatever. And you hand somebody with a card on their name on it and say, I want to give you money, then they're like, ooh. And then they'll start talking to you. So I lost that. But from doing that, I kind of learned more about what I wanted to do. And I'm like, oh. And while I was trying to do the subway station, I had ideas, and they were challenges unique to the location. And then when I said, well, I can do it anywhere now, and then I'm like, all right, I just need some place that has that Art Deco. And then I walk around and Google that, and I can find that, find the theaters with that. Project Ascension came about. There was no cyberpunk LARP that we were going to do. We're huge Shadowrun fans, but we never said that we were going to do a cyberpunk LARP until we're like, well, we want to get our website going. We need pictures. So I went around and I scouted, I pounded the pavement. I walked around the Lower East Side for 2 hours, and I found a place, which I won't tell you because I have players in the room, and it's a secret. I'll tell you on Monday, a week from Monday. I found a place. I talked to the manager, and I'm like, do you have a basement? Which is a problem, but I've talked to all my players about a basement. Do you have a basement that we could do a photo shoot in? And we went to the photo shoot, and we're like, what can we do here? And I'm like, all right, I told people to bring costumes, and they brought in costumes, and we realized we could do 2 photo shoots. We could do a steampunk photo shoot, we could do a cyberpunk photo shoot, and we did this one picture of a cyberpunk photo shoot. And it was Jason Knox, if you see me walking around, Jason Knox, his wife Kat, if you've seen the social media I put up of the very lean woman with the lights on the side of her head. We took that picture, and I'm like, I'm gonna curse. Does anybody, please let me know if you have any language problems. I'm like, I played the fuck out of that LARP. So I'm like, let's write it, let's do it. I talked to Jason. I told Jason, I'm like, I'm gonna plaster pictures of your wife all over the internet. And she was in the room, she's like, go right ahead. She's an actress and she likes it, likes the exposure. And that's how that LARP came to be, and we started with the location. I think it's easiest that way. I think it's easiest you find a location that inspires you to say, I would want to play in that.
Any pro tips for the housing and food part of the equation that come with some weekend LARP experiences?
For us, I mean, Armistice was in a hotel, so that was easiest. And one of the things that I really like about hotels, and they won't tell you this until they have a relationship with you, but you can ask them about it, is that hotels will let you sell the rooms at a higher rate than what they're charging. And anything over that amount, so like if they're charging you, say, $99 a night, you can charge $129 a night. Still a really good deal, but it also brings in, for every person who purchases a room, an extra $30 or $40. So hotels are sort of the perfect space for having everything. But when it comes to weekends, vacation rental places are really good for that. You know, if you have a 20-person LARP, there are a ton of vacation rentals out there that have enough bedrooms for that. It can get a little tricky if you've got some couples coming and a whole bunch of single people coming, because a lot of those places are, well, we have 2 queen beds in this room, and you want to try to sell every bed space as opposed to every bed, and then, you know, it gets complicated with the budget. But vacation rental places are a really good way to go. I try not to use Airbnb. I'm not a huge fan of their ethics, but the lake house community or the vacation rental properties that have been around forever, I do like to use those.
And which sites do you use?
VRBO.
VRBO and HomeAway?
And HomeAway.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The 2 sites that I would say to start with are VRBO and HomeAway.
And for the food equation, if you're doing it small enough that you don't have 100 people, like we had 56 last weekend, we pre-cook our food and provide food for the weekend. So Costco, and then that just folds right into the food budget. So we're able to do a weekend, 3 nights at a lake house for roughly 60 people with 6 kids and babysitting.
And the food came to 900.
And the food came to about 900, and the whole, it was like basically 200-ish a person, just to cover the costs, and that's what we charge.
Can you expand on what pre-cooking the food means?
So, yeah.
So like, if we're gonna do like a big pasta meal, we'll cook all the sauces ahead of time, and then all we have to do when it comes time to eat is cook up some noodles. Or we'll do like a sandwich bar, so you don't actually have to cook anything, you can lay out bread and kind of like what they did here yesterday. So there are lots of tacos are really good for that because you can slice up all the veggies ahead of time, cook the meat ahead of time, just bring it in, heat it up in crock pots.
Have everybody bring crock pots, yeah.
Yeah, if you really want easy inspiration for that stuff, just go to Pinterest and look up freezer meals or crock pot meals and.
Or go to Pinterest and feeding 50 people.
Yeah.
I mean,
You
there's
will
a lot
fall
of
down
that
a
stuff.
days long hole.
Your biggest logistic concern will actually be trying to ensure that nobody's cooking during game time,
Yeah.
which is why we did pre-cooked meals, because we were running into people having to drop out of game an hour early so they could cook.
Yeah.
And
And if
that's-
you tell people to bring their own food, they will bring so much food that at the end of the weekend, they'll bring their food and then they'll leave it. And so at the end of the weekend, you've got like 7 cars worth of food, and most of it you end up getting rid of, and then your heart hurts with the waste. So I recommend providing the meals as opposed to asking people to come and bring their own stuff.
So just, hotels have different models that they follow. If you're in a hotel, you may or may not be allowed to bring your own food.
Yeah.
So in my experience, looking through hotels, there are basically 3 models that hotels basically follow, and it's what they lead with. Are they a lodging first hotel, in which case what they really care about is that people are filling their rooms, and they will give you their function space, they will let you bring stuff in, they just want people in their hotel rooms. There are hotels that have hotel rooms sort of as an ancillary to the fact that they're a conference center. So they'll rent you their conference space, and the rooms are there sort of like extra, and they're not so concerned about whether people stay or not. You're gonna pay for the space. And then there are hotels that focus primarily on catering. In those particular hotels, you're going to buy your food from that hotel, or you're not gonna run your event there, or people are gonna go off-site.
I don't know which is which.
You don't until you start negotiating with the hotel,
Yeah.
although I can give you a few hallmarks. So if you ever go to a hotel that has a lot of function space, like lots of conference space, lots of meeting rooms, and then you ask them how many hotel rooms they have, and it's less than 100, they are not in the business of selling their hotel rooms. They're in the business of selling their conference rooms. There's also like within those categories, like hotels that cater to weddings very specifically, and they will usually focus more on catering than anything else, but sometimes the space stuff. So the answer is a little complicated because it really depends on where you're running your game and the sort of legalities of that and what your food restrictions and needs are in your player base, right?
I was just going to ask a question related to this, because I've run a lot of conferences,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if what you tell them you're doing also can affect the economic model. So like I did a conference at this historical hotel in Atlanta, and they didn't charge for any of the conference space. They just charged for catering and the guest rooms because it was a conference.
Right.
So that's another way to think about it, like how you sell it or how you package it may affect the pricing structure.
Where in Atlanta were you? Were you in Atlanta?
Yeah, right in the middle of Midtown Atlanta.
And did you have a diverse population there? Did you have a lot of people of color? When I run in New York City,
Well, this was an international conference, so everybody at it was from out of town.
Yeah.
so when I'm running, I have people in costume in New York City who, like, this is a big thing, I run this by Jason, who was black. We always look, and I come up with this idea, he's like, you can't do that, that's just not safe. And one of the things that I'm very big on now when I talk to people is I tell them exactly, when I walk in the door, I'm like, I have people who are going to be in costume, it's called a LARP, here's how you Google it, here's everything you can go through, because the last thing that I want is I don't want to be at that space and they find out, if you're running a conference and people are coming there, that's a different thing than somebody's going to be dressed up in a cyberpunk costume with glowing lights on the side of their thing. And they might, be simulated violence or something like that, and you're in New York City and the l.p.lade and the New York PD gets called on you. And then I'm worried about
Well, you
somebody.
definitely want to tell them what you're doing, yeah.
Yeah,
but I
don't
mean-
don't surprise them.
So when I come in, I run LARP, and they're like, what is that? I'm like, I want to pay you money, my guys are going to be in costume, just like a theater thing, and we want privacy, and I'm just looking to see how much you charge. And I don't want to work with somebody who has any sort of concern other than the fact that I'm going to give them money in a professional manner, and they're going to give me a service in a professional manner. And I can be friends with them over that, but I feel very strongly that we are doing ourselves a disservice long-term if we don't say we are doing LARP. Because we don't want to be working with people who think we're weird. Because that is, to me, I think that's a safety concern.
Yeah, it is.
I don't mean to shoot you
And
down.
long-term
It
relationship.
wasn't actually what I was suggesting. It more had to do with the business models and even like who you're talking to.
Yeah, when we got the Le Pavillon in New Orleans, we told them what we were, obviously, and they charged us less than they would have if we were a wedding, but they charged us more than if we were just, individuals throwing a party.
Right.
So I get exactly where you're coming from, is that the business model that they're going to, what they're going to charge you, what they're going to share with you is going to depend on, the size of your party, and what exactly you're looking for. I mean, we said we want all-inclusive, which means we want all of the meals from Friday morning through Sunday morning. And so they said, okay, well, you're clearly going to be spending a lot of money on catering, so we will not charge you for the spaces. And, we said, well, we want these spaces that you normally charge for, and they said, well, we're not, as long as you don't move the chairs around, we won't charge you for this space. So a lot of hotels are going to be willing to kind of maneuver from one business package to another, depending on your specific needs and depending on how nice you are. I mean, that showed, we got so many concessions from our hotel because we were nice.
Food is a huge lever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
With
is.
hotels, because
It is.
It makes so much money.
you have to sort of get your mindset into what their costs and expenditures are. They need to pay people, their catering people, that whole weekend, regardless of whether or not you're buying food, right? And so when an event comes in that rents space from you, and you're like, I'm getting the space, and you get the thing, and they're like, okay, I have to make enough money on that space to be able to pay those catering people. If I can make enough money on catering to pay the catering people, then great. That's my primary expense. They're not concerned about they're only concerned about lost revenue for the spaces that they have. And you will get into conflicts if you're trying to get a ballroom where they think they can get a wedding in. Those are hard. But so that's really the model. And then the other big leverage point is, are people going to come and stay in our hotel and give us lots of money to stay there? And they will give you kickbacks if they're that kind of hotel. They'll give you $10 or $20 back per room night.
We're missing the biggest one though, I feel. The number one thing is people say, I want to do a conference in May.
Yes.
I want to do a conference in September. I'm like, the number one thing that drives hotels, whether it's the number of the catering, all three things, is how many people they already have.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing something in New York, I walk in, I can get you, if anybody wants, I don't have this, I don't have a game for this. If anybody wants to run a game as large as you want for a full weekend for $120 a night for a single room in downtown Brooklyn, I have that for you. She's emailing me, asking me to fill up her hotel. It has to be the first or second weekend of February.
I was going to say,
It has to be the first or second weekend of February, right?
Yep.
Now that's a huge risk because I'm in New York in February.
Trains don't land.
I have to buy, now there's a cost for me, I have to buy event insurance for that one. If there's a blizzard, I need to have myself covered, right? But at the same point in time, $120, like $240, that's with taxes. I'm not talking with taxes, it's like 100 and something a day. To be in downtown Brooklyn, one stop from downtown Manhattan, by saying that I'll take it the first weekend of February. That's a huge thing.
Timing, and their cycles they drive all the prices.
Yeah, that's why we're running in the first weekend of the year.
January, yeah.
Because it's right between New Year's and Mardi Gras.
It's right between New Year's and Mardi Gras. It's the only weekend of the year in New Orleans where you can get things at that rate. The only weekend in the entire year.
Yep, absolutely. Those calendar things are absolutely critical. And if you really want a date, and we learned this, I'm helping to organize Intercon, and we lost our hotel a few years back, and we've been off our weekend for many years because in this area, if you want to get a hotel of any particular size, you have to plan at least 4 or 5 years out. That's the time frame. If you want to be able to target a specific weekend, that's how long it takes. If you have a smaller event and you don't need as much space, it's easier. But
And another secret of using hotel space is if you can establish a relationship with their salesperson, and you do a really good event and you bring them lots of money and they really like you, then they can go to their bosses the next year for another event and have arms to say that they can get us deals. So that's what happened with us in La Pavillon, is we were thinking about running to Boston in year 2, and La Pavillon's like, well, I think I can cut you guys, we can work with you now that I can go to my boss and say they brought in X amount of money, let's give them bonuses. And every year you do that, it gets better. This is why the same con is run year after year after year in the same space.
Because they like repeatable revenue. They want to know,
Yeah.
this weekend is full, that's the salesperson's job.
Yep.
To fill up all the weeks
Stability
and
and
weekends.
reliability is real
And you will
important.
get a lot of really good deals if you're going to keep doing it.
It's the salesperson's job, so that person is very incentivized to come. Let's talk a little bit about, like, once we've found a space, once like all of this has happened, like, what are the steps that you need to do to secure it? What happens next? You found it, it's a good space, you know, like, what do you need to do?
I mean, I work with a hotel. I mean, my steps are pretty obvious, so what do you?
You need a contract. You need a contract, you need a contract, you need a contract. I almost lost project extension 3 months ago because I did it in a handshake. And then I did it in an email, and then I had the email that he had the agreement, and I'm like, all right, let's do a contract. And then the other owner found out the deal he had made with me and fired the guy for making the deal. And then you have to go in. The other thing that I would say is the reason you need a contract is remember that no matter your location, when you start talking about the amount of money, it's not like this is a sale, and that means you're bartering. And the reason that you can bring prices up and down is because there's a salesperson there. They say, bring it at this rate, but the salesperson is incentivized. The salesperson makes money. If the salesperson charges $50 for a room, the salesperson still makes money. So that salesperson is your friend, and will bring the price down if you're looking to walk. But you got to get the contract. The other thing that I would say that you absolutely want is, so you got the contract, you talk to the salesperson, you're happy, everything is there. You need to talk to the manager who is actually going to be providing your service.
Yes.
And that is a person who is your friend. And that is going to likely be a different person. In my ideal situation, it goes like this. You go from salesperson introduces you to the owner, or the manager, or the person in charge, whose job it is for you to like them, and to make sure that the employers are making you happy. And then they're going to introduce you to the person, because that guy doesn't have time to do it, or that person doesn't have time to do it, they're going to introduce you to the person who's going to be managing day to day. And then get everything set up, I give them a plan, and then I will also tell you, don't necessarily worry about it once you get to that point. Once you have a contract in writing, the only thing you really have to worry about in New York City is the place going out of business, because that happens.
Are there things that should be in the contract that might not occur to us?
There's always something that should be in a contract. You're running the risk. I don't have a lawyer right now for a variety of reasons. But I'd recommend if you can, and it's how much can you afford? Everything costs money. I don't know. I got bid one place, I got bid the other place. I can tell you in my mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a walkthrough. I want the person who I'm working with on the walkthrough, and I want to be prepared for my walkthrough, and then I'm going to be able to say, I need audio-visual equipment. If you are an electrician or you don't know lighting, you need to talk to your lighting people and find out what the lighting is, particularly if you're in an older city. That's a huge problem. I am going to take the elevator. There's an elevator. I'm going to ride the lift if there's a lift. And if there's a lift, you're going to feel like an idiot because nobody ever looks cool going up a lift. It's a terrible thing that you install in buildings that can't have elevators. But take the lift up. That sort of thing. Get to know them. Check out the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Check out the bathrooms.
Gratuities.
Fees.
Make sure that's
everything. So when I do it, the thing that I want in a contract, this is how I can afford to run things in New York City, is generally when I'm talking to a place, and I like to separate, for Project Ascension, I separated the housing from the venue. I think there's an advantage to that in that you make your LARP more local. It's less expensive, more affordable. It's a $500 LARP, but without housing, it's a $260 LARP. And the way that I was able to do that is because I negotiated, I got my space for free. I just have to meet a minimum. I need to do a minimum spend. So I'm like, what's the minimum? And then the way that I managed to renegotiate with the guys, I raised the minimum, I moved some stuff around, I'm like, all right, I'm still within my cost structure. But, for example, I have an open bar, which is a different story, that was a big design discussion. I have an open bar at the event. Why do I have an open bar? Because if you're coming to Project Ascension, I could charge you $260 for nothing, or I could charge you $260 and give you 3 hours of alcohol and 2 meals, and it costs me exactly the same. So if I can negotiate that I am paying for a minimum, that is my ideal situation, but when I do the minimum, absolutely 100% include tax and gratuity.
So tell me what a minimum is.
A minimum means that I go in and I have to spend $7,500.
So there are a couple different ways of minimums. There are definitely things you should look out for because you can get really bit by them. In contracts food and beverage minimums are guaranteed.
And they don't include gratuities.
These are guaranteed dollar amounts.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's two ways. You can buy all the food yourself, for example, and say, this is just how I'm going to do it. This is how, for example, this conference, I'm pretty sure, is doing it. Or you can say, the hotel is going to provide concessions, and you guarantee that your participants are going to buy a certain amount at the bar or at the concessions. Be careful because sometimes the restaurant and the bar don't count. In those minimums, it's only from the designated concessions. So those are minimum food and beverage. There's also minimum room night requirements that you might hit in a hotel, and that is essentially saying you guarantee that I will sell 100 room nights or you're on the hook for anything that is less than that.
Although most hotels will give you a percentage, like you say, I'm going to sell 120 room nights, and they'll say, okay, if you have to make 70% of that.
Yeah.
If you don't make 70% of that, you have to pay up to 70%. So you've got to make up the difference up to 70%. It's usually better to go make sure that 70% is something you are guaranteed that you are going to sell, and then go over that some, because 9 times out of 10 you're going to end up needing more rooms rather than less rooms, and to do more rooms other than what you've already contracted for, they have to do an addendum, and when they do the addendum, they may not be able to give you the rooms at the same price. So to guarantee getting the price you want, you need to build that into the contract with, like, if you know for certain you're going to sell 100 rooms, but you're trying to sell 140, then you might contract for 130, because that's still within the 70-30 split, but also gives you wiggle room so that you can go up from 100.
And try to get that any shoulder rooms or rooms that your people rent on either end of the event count as towards your room nights in your
Yes.
contract.
Yeah.
Because that's, we easily made our rooms because people came in 2 nights. It's New Orleans near New Year's Eve, so people came in 3 nights early or stayed 3 nights late. And it was very easy for us to make our room.
Yeah, gratuities and fees are something that, if they're not specified in the contract, you're going to be on the hook for.
Yes.
Yes.
So make sure that is. So one of the surprises we had is they said X was our food minimum, and so we budgeted for X, but that did not include gratuities and fees.
Which
and
is
so,
a large percentage.
Which is,
which is a very large
sometimes like
percentage.
between 20 and 30%.
Wait, so correct me if I'm wrong, what you're saying, so right now, I have X amount of money put aside in my budget. I have $7,500 put aside in my budget. I only have X amount in my budget. I have, like, let's say $5,000 in my budget that I actually intend to spend. And I have $2,500 that's just sitting there. That $2,500 is my entirety of my profit. And then, as people buy beer, I get that back. Like if somebody says, oh, I want to buy another beer right before I leave, I get that price of beer back to me because I'm not on the hook for that anymore.
Yeah.
What we're saying is if you don't include tax and gratuity in that is Manhattan. That $8, $9 beer becomes $6 against you because there's only $6, the beer was only $6, and then you had 8%, almost 9% on the tax, another 20% on the tip. That's just there, so get in writing that entire thing, that everything that is spent. And then also be cognizant when you're pricing. I look at it almost, there's an advantage, huge advantage to it, because I know I can zero out this. And I zero it out, I have no risk, and I'm going to walk away with money the moment somebody buys a beer. It's a matter of how much. And hopefully my players are happy, jovial, and say, hey, let's keep on drinking here after the open bar. And I'm like, hey, yeah, go right ahead. And then I make money back there. But that money's I've already spent that money in my mind. That money is budgeted and put aside and I can't touch it. And then after the event, I will give that back as profit. So in my mind, so there's a lot of people who, you know, like, I don't have any money, like, you guys said that you zeroed out just a little oven, right?
We've got a little left in the
You
bank.
got a little bit left in the bank. Did you guys have a minimum, or did you pay for everything straight?
We pay for everything straight.
You pay for everything straight. So if you have people coming in, because I can do an all-inclusive, how many people here are eating, how many people here pay for breakfast at the con? If they have that arrangement, the arrangement that I have, that breakfast that you have, if they have it budgeted, and they said, well, I only need to do this so much for food, then that will get back to them, to their organization.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
So if you can't, I look at that as, but you can also get absolutely hosed. Absolutely hosed. It's like, yeah, if you go to Vegas, you have to have your bet covered. You're making a bet.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure when you do this, and this is where budgeting is huge, you have to go and say, this is how much money I have on the table.
Yeah, but
This is what you are going to, you and your participants are going to spend.
Yeah, but when we did Armistice, we had a catering budget. So we said, okay, we have X amount of money, and then we filled it all the way. So we knew exactly how much we were spending on food, and because basically we were paying per plate and per service, per dinner. So we knew exactly how much we were spending, but we didn't have gratuities and fees.
And you need to be careful because
Yeah,
the
I know.
person who,
It's one of the reasons we lost money.
the person who sold us on the catering, when I asked ahead of time, does this include taxes and tips? They said yes. And then in the contract, there, in the fine print, you know, does not include gratuities, but if you don't read that carefully, like I didn't, then you end up, you know, whatever. But it is the salesperson's job to sell you. So they may not outright lie to you, but they may let you believe something that isn't quite true.
Yeah,
It's a
so,
mistake to make once with that.
Exactly. You make it once and you don't make it again.
yeah, get a lawyer.
Can I redirect slightly? I'm sorry if I'm monopolizing the questions, but I'm really interested in this. When you talk about spaces that are not hotels for a while,
Yeah.
I'm interested in like historic homes or like abandoned factories or weird spaces, camps, right? Those are the things that I'm extremely interested in, and I'm wondering what the differences are, or what the cost structures might be that are different in terms of putting people there and feeding them and so forth.
What, you guys want to talk about, maybe, I can't do camps, do you do camps?
Well, we looked at some retreats as opposed to camps, although they had camp elements to
Probably
them.
similar.
Yeah, and those tended to be more, and actually, Jeff, if Natasha were here, she could totally speak to this because when you have retreat type places, you might sell like per cabin. And then, you know, if there's a major space in the center, like, actually we looked at one place that was a campground and it had like 40 little cottages, and each of the little cottages had 2 beds in it, and you could use the 50 acres of space for free if you filled a certain number of cabins. So that was, you know, one thing we looked at, and the more cabins you filled, the cheaper it actually was for you. So they wanted you to use as much of that as possible. One of the things that you really have to look at if you're doing campgrounds or you're doing retreat sites or you're doing things like historic homes is, are the owners going to be on site? Do they, you know, are they going to come in and do some kind of checking of what's going on? Are they going to want to walk through the space? Are they going to want to be there the whole time?
Do they have a representative there for you?
Yeah, because one of the problems that we ran into is we live in the South, and a lot of these spaces are run by very Christian organizations. And so you run into the problem of, well, okay, you can use our space, but we're going to have somebody there at all times. And so even when you start to say, well, we're going to be doing role playing and we're going to have people in costumes, then they get real squirrely. And so, I mean, you may not have that problem as much when you talk about getting out of the South. But at least for us, that was something we had to deal with was, do we really want to have them on site the whole time?
So the risk there being that they're just going to shut you down?
Yeah, that they're gonna come in and be like, we're not comfortable with this, we're shutting you down.
Or break the immersive experience, because you have somebody.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anybody actually being kicked out in the middle of an event. That's really rough.
I have.
You have?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Picked out.
Yeah.
Anytime, so this is one of the reasons I appreciate your professional relationship thing. Anytime you're dealing with an organization or institution whose purpose is not either a profit motive that you are contributing to, or understands exactly what you're doing at all levels of the organization, there's a chance that your access to that site will be remote. I've run a lot of games at universities. And usually using free space by various ways. The universities are great to do this because they have a lot of interesting spaces, and they generally are public service minded, but also have been kicked out of organizing a space on Friday night for a weekend-long game at a university, where we had to find another location on Friday night for the remainder of the game to replace that university.
What'd you do?
We did nothing other than that we did not get. Oh, you mean how did we? Oh, it was terrible. We actually ended up in a church on Saturday because we had access. There's some of the people who were attending had access to church space, which was nothing like a large university catwalk laden science building, but it was a space that we could be in, and then. Finally in someone's home on Sunday because the church, for some reason, was not as interested in us being in the church on Sunday.
Churches are really good places for every day of the week but Sundays.
Every day
Yeah.
except Sunday.
Anyway, so you always have to be careful if you're dealing with an organization that has some purpose that is not contractual, even if it's contractual. Like we had an agreement, we had letters, we showed them the letters, they're like,
They can get out of it.
Yeah.
I don't care. This is our space.
And universities will schedule over your event. So if you schedule an event at a university and somebody comes along that they feel should have the space more, they'll just cancel your contract.
And they may not tell you.
And they may not even tell you.
But a few weeks ago, I was at one, and we walked into the building, we had the whole building reserved, and there was a science fair in it.
Surprise. Is there a question over
We
here?
had to move that there.
Not so much a question, we've been running an event at a campsite for like 6 years now, I think, and I've done a lot of location searching at campsites because that's within our price range, generally speaking. One of the things you definitely like with a hotel, privacy.
Yeah.
Because if you have an a la carte style campsite where you can rent the pavilion or you can rent these cabins, they might fill some other part of that camp while you're there. We had tried another site that was a Boy Scout camp, and we didn't mention anything about privacy. We rented part of the camp because it was a huge camp. We put a Boy Scout troop right next to us. Like, we're talking end of the room was where the Boy Scouts were while we're trying to run a sci-fi LARP with some graphic scenes over here, and the Boy Scouts are cameras out, filming what's going on. It was bad. But the campsite, after we mentioned this to them, was like, oh, no, we understand now because they've never run with a LARP before. And they were very willing to work with us in the future. Unfortunately, we probably won't go back there. But, so privacy is very important. The other thing I ran into is also with staying in the hotels, catering. Sometimes sites will not allow you to bring food on. They won't allow you to cook in their kitchen even if they have one. They have their own staff or they have their own caterers, and they want you to buy their food, which can immediately put you over your price range.
That's it, and that speaks to the idea of being very clear about your purpose and what you will be doing.
I do a lot of historical costuming, and two venues that you might want to think about too are Weird Lake Elks lodges and Freemason lodges. They tend to be super cheap. They're very tolerant of strange behavior. They'll often have a bar or some other component like that, and they're usually old. And then Lizzie's been working with the Peabody Essex, but especially in New England, and I'm sure in the South too. When I was living in Atlanta, there were all these plantations. There's all these historical houses that are literally empty and locked all the time. And the museums really want stuff happening in them, and they're even willing to do stuff that isn't historical, like the Crane Estate every year does this absolutely horrible live action Clue game, which really could be done much better.
Yeah.
They basically took the most boring thing about Clue and made it the central thing, except stretched it out for 3 hours.
Oh, I saw the ad for that and I was like, oh, sign me
It's
up.
such a
Oh,
great
it's
idea.
definitely worth going, it's definitely worth going, but
It's
that doesn't
not
mean that it's not.
No, it's like the most important thing about the game is the centerpiece. But the point is, those places are there, and I think for the museums in particular, if you're just doing a day or evening thing, they might not even charge for it. And then the other reason I bring the museums up is because their audiences are really different. So this earlier conversation that's been happening in different sessions about curating your audience. I went to a LARP at the Science Museum in Boston that was packaged as a performance art piece, a participatory performance, and it was like all middle-aged and older men and women. An audience that would never come to something that they thought was a LARP. So,
I think you touched on something else that was very important when you started saying, hey, all these historic houses, knowing your area is invaluable. And just get out there and there's two ways I think that you can do it. One, and this is what I do, is once every 2 weeks, I just start walking. Whenever I need space, I'm like, I gotta take a day and I'm gonna walk through New York for 4 hours. And I find stuff left and right that you just don't know about.
Well, and if someplace says it's for sale, a lot of times they will rent you that space.
They will rent that.
If they haven't sold it yet. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt to call up the number on the for sale sign and say, hey, if this hasn't sold yet, can we rent it for a weekend? A lot of people are like, yes, rent my space, because it's not bringing in any money any other way.
There is a space on the corner of 23rd and 7th Avenue in Manhattan. If you don't know Manhattan, that means that I am less than 10 blocks from Penn Station. I am next to a subway stop. This place has a huge basement. This place is, I think it was 9,000 square feet. And they were offering it to me for $10,000 a month. I want you to bring me 9,000 square feet, $10,000 a month on 23rd and 7th. Because she owned the building, it had been vacant for a while, and she just wanted to get somebody in it, because a woman lived above the place. And she's just looking for somebody who's gonna be in there and pay her taxes. That's what she wants. And you just find that by calling it up. And my thing was, and the reason that I got active in the New York City LARP community is that we don't have enough LARPers in the biggest city in the United States to pay $10,000 a month in rent collectively. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. We have 11 million people in this metropolitan area. They should be able to find enough people who can do this. So the goal is to get a place like that so that we don't ever have to worry about space again. The other thing that I think, and I think you touched on this when you say meet new, is you gotta meet people. Like, I never knew about that, so now I can say, hey, so we have these empty historical houses. If you start talking to people and talking to non-LARPers, I just went and saw a dance performance. And this is one of the points that I want to make here, is that we in LARP think that we are struggling and having problems finding space. Talk to a dance company, and you will say, wow, we have the performers paying to perform, right? Think about that. So when you look at that situation, and I just went to this dance company, which was called At the Center. This was on 86 in Amsterdam, 1 block over from the subway, 1 block over from Broadway. If you've been to New York, you might have LARPed at the Center. It's a nonprofit organization, and they have a giant room for $400 for the night, which is really good. But they took me in time. What they did is they just didn't take the Saturdays, and they were there for a 3-week run, and they had the run of this place. This is an old style 1800s church and then they were able to go up and they were able to use both balconies, and they had the back room, and they had the sacristy, and they had the basement. They did Orpheus and Orpheus in the Underworld, a dance version of that, and you could descend into the underworld. They went all the way through this, and then I'm like, these guys are amazing. It was like a poor man's Sleep No More, but you realize this was done by people in their free time on a minimal budget. I'm like, this is amazing. I go to them, I'm like, how much did it cost you? How much was the total cost for this production for 3 weeks runs in this space, 1 block off of Broadway in Midtown Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, but it's changing. And they told me $5,000 total. And I'm like, and I just thought, I'm like, what kind of LARP? I'm like, $5,000. I started saying, if I told you that I could give you 5 days of LARP in New York City, and anybody who knows that location, beautiful location, 5 days of LARP in New York City, if I could get, 100 people to pay $50, that was only one, that was a 3-week run, 3-week run. I would never know that if I hadn't talked to them, if I hadn't gotten outside the community. And there's people who are solving, the space is a problem that everybody has. If you're an off-Broadway theater company and you're meeting on the board, the number one problem that you're talking about every time is space. What's my lease? My lease is up. The lease for the Barrow Group, which I'm on, is up in 6 years. We don't know what we're doing. We work on that problem full time. With the Roundabout Theater Company right now, the biggest nonprofit theater company in New York City, worries about its space. It's their number one problem. Everybody in the world who's doing any sort of art, everybody in the country.
The other thing I was going to mention is theaters.
Yes, I was
The
gonna
Center
say
Theater Group
that.
here has hosted Club Drosselmeyer 2 years in a row. If they're not doing a play, their space is empty for 3 months, so
And they love us. They love us. We pay better than theater companies.
Yeah.
We pay better than theater companies if you're doing a professional LARP. We're going to pay for the space. We're not going to argue about it. We're going to be like, how much is your space? How many people have ever argued down their LARP space? How many people have tried? There you go.
They're trying to say, okay, well, you just get the wedding package. It's like, well, what's in the wedding package? Well, a DJ, we don't need a DJ. Well, this we don't need that. So.
Well, and one of the things that I want to make sure to mention before we run out of time is actually something Hanging Lantern had to deal with when they were putting together their real royalty package, is that any place you work with that does its own sales, you've got to negotiate with them ahead of time how those tickets or how those rooms are going to be handled, because hotels require that you call and make a reservation and give your credit card, okay? But if you are saying, I'm giving you an all-inclusive experience and I'll take care of everything, then you don't necessarily want the location, the venue, dealing with each individual. You want to take care of that instead. And the people we've worked with have been really great about that. They've said, here, we'll give you all the room keys and you can pass them out, just as long as they sign a form with their credit card number for incidentals. But we don't ever need to see them at the front desk. Whereas their venue gave them hell because they wanted all the addresses and phone numbers of all the people coming so that they could then later market to them.
Well, and then they try to play it off as this is a legal issue that all hotels across the country have to have a list of who you are, where you're from, and everything like that. So if a fire were to happen, fire marshal comes up and there's a roster, and it was a huge battle that should have been taken care of up front instead of at the time we had to take care of it.
I think to talk about unusual spaces, spaces that are not normally rented, and you're kind of getting to that, you're really looking for opportunities that are in times of disuse. So like either they're not used at all, or you can get really excellent like private dining for just the cost of the dining if you go in the afternoon between lunch and dinner. Like you can get really nice spaces, and I've had a lot of success with that. And people are very accommodating, and usually, especially during times when they have downtime. I've gotten waiters and wait staffs and cooks all to play parts for me as part of offering games. And you just have to ask it. Many people will help.
Yeah, I mean,
as long as you're structured in it.
The problem is that for many LARPers, the weekend is what they can do. And so, so most of the time, you're looking for sites that are in disuse, instead of just like for a part of a day, that are in disuse for like, in January and February, a lot of theater companies, other than in New York, are not, they're in their downtime. So you can find theaters that you can use, and a lot of times those theaters have spaces other than just the main theater room that are really useful.
However, in New York, I found out, and I imagine it's like in a major city, if you go on Memorial Day or Labor Day, and you just go off the beaten track, you find another theater. The theater world is dead on those 2 days, on those 2 weekends. Like I got theater space in New York for $400 for an evening, for a Friday evening, black box, 99 seats.
Nightclubs are good. If you're doing, if you're going to bring them more money than they would make in a night at a nightclub, then they will absolutely, especially if you're like, well, we want it Thursday through Sunday, that Thursday night, they would normally not make any money, so a lot of times they'll be willing, and during the day when they're not open, they're a lot more happy to have
Galleries.
galleries.
Co-working spaces, if you need a corporate sort of space, co-working spaces do not book. They cannot fill their weekends. Nobody works. No businessman is going to fly to New York to go to a conference on Saturday night.
We've also used office parks, like places that have a lot of office spaces in them. On the weekends, nobody's in them. Or a lot of times you'll find old office parks that don't actually have any offices in them anymore. Those are really good. Abandoned malls that have shut down, those are really good as well, as long as the people who own them are willing to rent them out.
And then they still have the utilities.
And they still have the utilities.
So speaking of utilities is very important. You have to check, especially older things, especially if it's winter, you have to check that the utilities actually work.
Yeah.
Campsites, a huge problem, which is that they're not heated, they have to shut down all their water systems over the winter. And if you book in March in New England, you might be able to get it, but it also may have no water and no facilities.
Although they may include that if you pay for it, they might turn those things
Yeah,
back
they
on
might,
for you.
but if the weather is still cold, they may not be able
Yes,
to.
right, exactly.
Right, so like there's risks that you kind of end up, if you go to these marginal spaces, sometimes those are, yeah.
So a lot of the discussion has been around getting in the right place at the right time. But I'm part of an organization that meets every month. So what do you do for finding an indoor place that meets every month?
Raise your fees.
No, Mark, shut up. We're not allowed to
Where
say that.
are you
I'm
looking?
in Boston.
Sorry, Mark.
Okay, great.
Mark just hit it on the head. And this speaks to a problem that I feel very strongly about in LARP. I did a question on my Facebook page recently. And I'm like, what do you guys expect out of a $50 LARP? And I got a lot of different answers. But universally, there's one thing that everybody had in common. That what people expect out of a $50 LARP is a $100 LARP.
Yeah.
That's what they want. And so you're trying to find discounts and stuff like that. And I think part of the problem, and I am very glad organizations are there to give affordable LARP. I think that is very important, and I'm glad that it's there. And generally, those are monthly organizations who meet and have relationships in the same place. But at the same point in time, I think there's a balance between devaluing LARP as a whole. Because if I can get 4 hours of entertainment for $10, then that's subsidized elsewhere. And often that's subsidized on volunteer labor. Which is okay if you're a 501c3 in my mind. But that's a different story, and that's a different debate, not here. If the challenge to speak to the specific challenge, because I was in an organization called the Camarilla, which is now the MES, for many years, on both sides of it. We have a number of people here. There's several things that I've seen work very well. One is that in many places in this country, people use people's houses. I think that is a very viable alternative. And you say, but if you want, or you can do, there were people who had homeowners associations, played in a pool house once, which is actually a very nice pool house. And you're just going to have to go to the members and say, you're leveraging the personal relationships of everybody in your group. And just remember that people are doing a lot of emotional labor to get you these sites.
Is it a free event?
We charge, but we have sort of an upper limit of how much
That's a
people are willing to
perfect
pay.
job for an Elks Lodge. Like, I go to swing dances that are $20 a person with a live band in Elks Lodge. I'm sure they pay nothing for the space.
Yeah, the best thing, exactly like Ryan is saying, is always seen historically is tap the members of your group and see who has something available, because I have played in people's workplaces that close at 5 o'clock and we show up 2 hours after and go play in there. I played a vampire game for 2 years in a DMV after hours.
Do you have any veterans in your group?
It was actually pretty cool.
I don't think so, actually.
Well,
One by
if
state
anybody has a
country.
veteran in their group, there's community centers, but there's always a VFW in almost every
You also
place.
have a problem that if you're talking about, especially a group like the MES, which has been around for 25 years, you're fighting against a culture that's been paying $5 a head. And I know that when I was part of the MES, just trying to double it to 10 was egregiously difficult.
They'll double to 10, make it 50.
Yeah,
Like change the
that's how DR
ballpark.
did it. I mean,
No, I'm
DR has a
serious,
lot of other
like-
problems, but,
like-
you know.
We've had a player try to tell us that we were elitists and playing a rich man's game because we wanted to institute a $5 site fee.
No,
And wait, I don't want to attack an organization. They provide something.
I was just thinking, no, but it's a culture of a particular
I'm
process.
gonna actually
Hold on.
speak up and say, listen to the moderator,
Yeah,
because
hold
I've got
on.
like 4 people and I can't.
let's just, we're getting sort of diverting into things that are not really about location, although money is definitely an important aspect of location. There are, one way of doing it is to become a charitable organization, and there are many more free spaces that are available to charitable organizations. Talk to me about it afterwards. I'm part of NEAL, and it's something that we're pursuing, and might be willing to host people.
Could I offer something that I personally would love to see, because you talked about charitable organizations?
Sure.
LARP, to me, is an art, right? Are people willing to agree with that? It would be within the scope of a larger nonprofit to say we are a nonprofit that's devoted to giving people space.
Yes. And promotion of art, which is NEAL's mandate, but we're not a 501(c), which is what you need to be generally to be able to tap into those things. Just because you have to go through that designation. So that is something that we're pursuing, and we should be in communication about. The last thing I wanted to ask about, if we have 4 minutes left, is the dream of dedicated LARP space, permanent dedicated LARP space.
That's
Which you may think is that, but I can tell you of 3 at least places that are dedicated full-time LARP spaces in New England, just off the top of my head that I know. There's Camp Eagle Pass, there's Eagle Commons, and there's Bergen Dar up in Maine. And I'm sure there are others that I don't know about. So there are people, especially on the buffer side of things, who are making this a reality. Eagle Pass has been built out specifically for LARPing. Others are being built out at various levels of facilities. So is this possible? It's a possibility. I'm just wondering what people...
I can tell you right now that people are doing this at this conference.
Yeah.
There are people here that are actually, have offers to spaces for
Yeah.
precisely this purpose.
Yeah.
So, this
Please,
is
I want to
happening.
talk to them.
Yeah.
But like, I know the space at Kathaleen is
Yeah.
dedicated specifically to a game that runs once a year, you know, but it is their dedicated space.
Like I said, like the goal of my organization, if you go to my website, you look at our mission, is to establish a space for parlor LARP in Manhattan or Brooklyn. That is our specific goal by 2020, and that's a very difficult thing. I think to do that, you can call it a community, you can call it a customer base, but you have to have a community or customer base that is appropriate to the size, to the price of a rental,